with Brittany Dufresne.
Hello everyone, happy Friday. Thanks for tuning in to the KTAL News Now Digital Streaming Center. Thanks for joining us today. We are here covering breaking news. That is what the Digital Streaming Center is for, breaking news and providing the community with real-time information and stories and covering issues that matter to you. Today we are discussing how Taylor Parker continues to scheme while in Bowie County Jail, and I am joined by Roy. Carolyn Roy is here with us today as she is our digital executive producer and courtroom reporter who has been covering this trial since day one. Hey, Carolyn, how are you doing today?
Hey, Brittany, I'm good, thanks.
Awesome. Alrighty, so we are going to jump in here and talk a little bit about from where we left off and to where we are today and some new information that we have gathered already. So, Carolyn, we're going to start on last week we ended on the prosecutor and the defense resting, and then starting this week they began with closing arguments. Can you tell us what happened starting Monday and where we are today?
Sure. So, of course, what happened Monday was that Taylor Parker was found guilty of capital murder and kidnapping in the death of Reagan Hancock and the kidnapping of her unborn preterm baby girl, Braxton Sage. And that came after closing arguments Monday morning, where the state spent about 40 to 45 minutes in total telling the jury all of the evidence and testimony that they presented during the first 2.5 weeks of the trial, 3 weeks of the trial, really leads to the conclusion that there's no other verdict but guilty. The defense did spend 8 minutes just asking the jury to consider a lesser conviction on the charge of murder based on the definition of a person as defined by Texas law. When it comes to kidnapping, they argued that the baby wasn't born and therefore was not a person and could not be kidnapped. Obviously, the jury didn't buy that. It took about 40 minutes to an hour in total to come back and actually give that verdict. So that's where we left things off on Monday. And next week, we'll begin the penalty phase of the trial with the same jury and in the same courtroom.
So as you said, next week we are moving in, or not next week, I apologize. So we're moving into the sentencing phase of this trial, and that is October 12th that date is set for. So as we look ahead, it's come to my attention that you've discovered some new information, some evidence that may be presented. Can you tell us a little bit about this court document and, what is it exactly?
Sure. So I have a copy of it right here. It's 33 pages. And it was actually filed in August, the month before the trial began, which that was September 12th. This was filed about August 17th. And what it is a notice of intent to use extraneous offenses during the trial, both parts, both the guilt and innocence phase as well as the penalty phase. Some of it did come out during the guilt and innocent phase, but a lot of it goes more to what this state is going to make regarding aggravating factors in making their arguments to the jury about whether Taylor Parker should receive the death penalty. So this is what I talked about last week, the part of the trial where the jury decides whether there are enough mitigating circumstances. Up to specifically since she's been incarcerated after her extradition back to Texas from Oklahoma a few days after the murders.
And so let's talk a little bit about some of that information that is within that. I've been able to read your article that she's been posting on, that it has been posted to ktalnews.com. You can take a look at that there. And so it talks a little bit about Taylor Parker trying to frame other people, not just some of her inmates, but also Wade, Homer, and Reagan. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, so there's a couple different things going on here. This is all according to prosecutors who provided this information, and that they're expected to present during this penalty phase. But there's a sophisticated jailhouse scheme, is how Assistant District Attorney Kelly Chris described it in this document, to frame other inmates, including one that they described as fragile-minded. So that scheme involved 2 confession letters. It involved asking other inmates to take these copies of these confession letters and get them out of the jail and deliver them to the local newspaper. And then she was asking, allegedly, to get other witnesses, fabricate other witnesses, in the form of inmates who would go to the jail staff and say that they had seen things, or that they knew things, or had found evidence, presumably when they got out of jail, in order to corroborate the fake confession that Taylor Parker was allegedly trying to put on these other inmates. It's a convoluted scheme. It's one of those, just another sort of classic example of what we've come to know as the kind of scheming that the state already proved in the guilt and innocence phase of the trial that Taylor Parker is capable of, and it seems that she hasn't let up since she's been in custody. On the other hand, in addition to this a plot to frame fellow inmates, Taylor Parker has allegedly been telling a wide variety of different alternative stories about quote-unquote alternative perpetrators in this. As you mentioned, then Homer Hancock, Reagan Hancock's husband, Wade Griffin, Taylor Parker's ex-boyfriend, and other people that are presumably made up, according to the information provided by the state in this document, that are supposedly a gang of drug dealers, is another scenario. And she even allegedly claimed to some inmates and pen pals, or whatever you want to call them, jailhouse lovers, that the Reagan herself called her out on the morning of the murder about her fake pregnancy, and then refused to call Wade, pretending to be Taylor's nurse, and telling him that she'd lost the baby. So that's yet another version where Taylor Parker has allegedly been coming up with all kinds of different scenarios to tell or explain her innocence, or to explain why she was forced to do it, or that she was framed. There's a lot of detail in this document about all of that. We've touched on it in that story online, and I expect that we're going to hear a lot more about it when the prosecutors begin to make their case starting next week. We don't know what order things are going to come up in, but there is a lot in this 33-page document, so there's going to be a lot for the jury to absorb.
Yeah, so it seems like she is continuing to scheme, continue to do a lot of things still in that Bowie County jail, almost, like she's causing chaos there. And I think you've read that she's doing a lot of other things to kind of stir things up there. Can you tell us a little bit about some of those things that she's doing?
Sure. Now, all of these things, of course, are things that the prosecutors are alleging. They do provide evidence, and they say they are going to submit into evidence all the notes and documents and emails and letters in order to support these allegations of this extraneous behavior, of these other criminal offenses. So just to note that's part of the sort of the process of a trial, of course. So the chaos is actually exactly how the prosecutors have described it in this document. The things that Taylor Parker's allegedly been doing since she's in custody include things that have gotten to the point where the jail has actually had to change its policies and procedures in order to deal with them. So a lot of it has to do with the sick calls that she's requested and the medical care that she's demanded, that the state says that has been entirely unnecessary care. In part because she allegedly was using the sick calls in order to pass notes to her jailhouse lovers, and also to coordinate some of these other schemes that they've detailed in this document, as far as the plot to frame fellow inmates and the like. So they addressed this issue they were having with her with these frequent medical calls by going ahead and doing her medical examinations, responding to those sick calls to her in her cell, instead of walking her or transporting her to the medical facility within the jail. And she, according to this document, pitched a fit. She became very upset and irate. She's also caused trouble over her preference to be handcuffed in the front as opposed to in the back, and at other times allegedly has even convinced or somehow gotten the corrections officers to let her go unhandcuffed completely. And they talks about one time when she was supposed to be going to, I think, maybe a therapy session with a mental health counselor in the jail, and the mental health counselor had to say, she's supposed to be handcuffed. So those issues, they've had to make changes in order to make sure that she is properly restrained. When is she supposed to be? Keeping her in her cell, and having the medical staff come to her, which she does not like, but it keeps her from doing all this note passing and other communications, and supposedly flirting too with her jailhouse romances. So there's that. There's also, I'm trying to remember, there's a lot in this document. So there are times when she's wanted to be out of her cell. She is in protective custody, which means there should be like limited time, for recreational activities. So she's been trying to allegedly manipulate opportunities to be out of her cell, even when she's not supposed to be, and gets very upset, allegedly, when she's not allowed. And she's also tried to use sort of medical excuses to finagle what she wants. She wants the lights off when she's sleeping, so she claimed that a medical professional had recommended that the lights be allowed to be off in her cell. That didn't go over. So a lot of things like that, just kind of trying to get her way, is how the prosecutor put it in the document.
Yeah, and it sounds like she's almost, kind of getting it, being able to manipulate and cause this chaos and confusion, being able to take advantage of those sick calls and false medical claims. But it seems like they are also catching on to, some of the things that she's doing. And yeah, go ahead. Did you have something?
Well, I would just note that this was filed, like I said, in August before the trial, about less than a month before the trial started. And it documents these activities since Taylor Parker was brought, like I said, back from Oklahoma to Texas and booked into the Bi-State Detention Center. So this is really through October 15, 16, I think, or 14th, 2020, up through, it looked like I said, it was filed in August, but there's another example in these documents about how she was putting one over on, trying to get around basically having her inmate account garnished to pay for those medical visits, because inmates do have to pay the county back for those that medical care, but that she'd found an end run by having her mother buy commissary items for other inmates in the name of other inmates, and then those inmates would give Taylor the items that her mother had bought, and the document notes how much Taylor owed the county for those medical expenses as of February 2022. And another part of the document talks about how somehow Taylor Parker was able to access and reactivate her Snapchat account in April 2022. So I'm not sure how far the documentation of these activities kind of lead up to before this document was filed, or whether it's continued, and whether the jail has had to continue to make policy changes. So just kind of a note there that when we talk about, whether Taylor Parker is actively still doing these things, we can't say. These documents don't talk about last week or since the trial began. But there is quite a bit, obviously, over the last 2 years since she has been in custody.
Yeah, no, good thing to clarify that as well, and especially because this is stuff that they've collected through, as you mentioned, emails and letters, and even just as you talked about and touched on too, just how she is, using the false medical claims to pass letters, and the relationships that she's built with other inmates, and almost these romantic relationships. Is there anything else that we do know about that, and how she was able to develop some of those relationships?
Well, according to the documents, according to the state and the prosecutors in this document, she's had help from family members, specifically, I think, her mother and a friend who she's been able to ask to reach out to, I think, potential romantic interests via Facebook. There's some documentation of emails that Taylor sent to her mother to ask her to give her the names of some of these men and where they live, and just asking them to reach out to her through the online communication system that people can use to send emails and send money to to those who are incarcerated. So there's a few examples of that, as well as her telling a friend in an email that she wanted to reach out to someone who was the brother of someone who told her he'd been asking about her. So the implication there being, oh, this person seems to be interested in me and want to know more. Maybe this is someone that I can connect with, as a pen pal or whatever. But she also told the same friend that she was looking for a sugar daddy, is literally what she said, someone to load up her Inmate account.
And then so as we continue to look more into some of the things that were in that document, besides her just communicating with family and creating these relationships, is there anything else that was specific that you wanted to touch on today that was that may be presented into this next sentencing phase?
Well, the thing that ties this jailhouse scheme to frame fellow inmates and all these jailhouse romances together is that there's overlap there. Some of the inmates that were named in this document and are potential witnesses during the penalty phase of the trial were also in relationships with Taylor Parker, allegedly. So there are going to be all manner of communications, notes, emails, letters, jailhouse calls that are going to be introduced to support all of this information and all of this as evidence and testimony about the scheme and just about the varying stories of alternate perpetrators. So we're going to probably get to see at some point during the penalty phase of the trial some of those letters and notes and exactly what she said. There are excerpts in this document. I've included some of those in that story online. But there's a trustee that Taylor Parker was apparently in a jailhouse relationship with and who had since been transferred to another facility. Some of those are explicit, but they also talk about her wanting to build a relationship based on God, talking about the importance of honesty in the relationship and not playing on people's emotions, which I think anybody that's been following this trial might find that pretty ironic in and of itself. So there's going to be a lot of that in there, but that's just almost, you could say, scratching the surface of really what was revealed in these documents and probably what the prosecutors actually have in mind when they present their case next week.
Now, before we kind of close things up here, I did want to touch on one more thing that I found was interesting reading the article in regards to, and this may take us back a little bit to the beginning on kind of how this, relationship with the Hancocks even started between Reagan Hancock and Taylor. But so it was said that she photographed their wedding. Is there anything else that was released about that and just how they all come to know each other?
Well, the one mention, as we've certainly reported before online, but maybe not discussed here, is that Taylor Parker did shoot Reagan Hancock's engagement photos as well as her wedding photos. It looked like, according to the evidence presented in the first part of the trial, that their relationship goes back all the way at least till March of 2019. The Reagan Hancock and Homer Hancock's wedding was in September 2019, so they knew each other for obviously well over a year before the murders. And also, it's not that that relationship or the origin of it is really talked about in these documents, but one thing that does reference, in a way, the wedding and Reagan is that Taylor Parker apparently in the days of COVID and during pre-trial hearings would show up in court with a sunflower mask, a mask decorated or printed somehow with a sunflower motif, which the prosecution notes in the document that is something that's become symbolic of the memory of Reagan Hancock and Braxton Sage. So the prosecution clearly is bringing that up to make a point to say that the person that photographed the Hancock wedding surely knew that sunflowers were a prominent theme in the wedding and have become a prominent symbol of the memory of this young mother and the baby that were killed by Taylor Hancock. So it's almost a gut punch and an insult to injury, I'm sure, to the members of the family to have had to see that sort of a passive-aggressive message from Taylor. How else could it be taken? And I think that's why the prosecution included that in this evidence and possibly could bring it up to the jury. Yeah,
it was just really interesting to learn that there. And so And to talk a little bit more about maybe some of the people that are joining us here and have some questions, going to bring in a question here. And I'm not sure if Carolyn is able to answer this, but they're kind of curious in regards to Taylor Parker causing so much chaos and turmoil. Why is she still allowed access to these emails and phone calls and writing letters and things like that?
As inmate rights, inmates have access to email. I don't know if at some point that can be revoked if they do cause too much trouble or if they use it to commit a crime, which it seems like that's what the prosecution is saying. I think framing someone else for a murder constitutes a crime, but I'm not an attorney, but that's why they bring it up in here, is it's extraneous bad acts, not necessarily, it can include, but doesn't necessarily have to include things that they've been adjudicated for, that they've been to court for or charged with. So I don't know that they can revoke those rights. We do know that Taylor Parker has filed a number of grievances and threatened lawsuits against the jail staff individually and against the county itself for perceived mistreatment and discrimination. They've also said actually that she's made comments that seem like they could be taken in a threatening way, saying things to the effect of, "You don't know what I'm capable of," or "Let me, I'll take care of it if you let me in that." So I think she was saying that about another inmate. So she clearly is sort of making references to what she's capable of, and making threats and complaining already about discrimination. So I don't know that would stop them from being able to take away those rights if it became necessary. That's a good question. Be happy to try to find that out. But for now, she does have access, and she gets visitors too. We know she's received visitors. We know that she's had phone calls with relatives and friends, and of course had access to the email and the mail system to be able to communicate with friends and family.
And so, as Carolyn has mentioned, that this was all information that she's recovered from a 30-page document. And so you can actually find the article that she has, detailed this information in on our website on ktalnews.com. And I'm going to show you right here. If you're looking to start from the beginning, we have full details on all the articles that we've been covering since the beginning of this trial. You're going to just go here to this quick links area where it says Taylor Parker trial coverage, and you're going to go ahead and click that, and it has all the information there. Has us live right now and all the details that you can find that there, and all the information, even more in-depth coverage in regards to this documentation starting from day one, and will continue to follow everything that's taking place in the next phase of this sentencing beginning October 12th. Once again, saying that here. So thank you guys so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. If you do have any questions, you can put them in the comment section and we'll be answering them after the live as well. And be sure to join us in the next live. We'll try to continue this up. We've been sticking with our theme of Friday at 4 o'clock, so be sure to tune in next time. Thank you guys again for joining us. Hope you guys have a great and safe weekend.